Through the centuries, there have been Christians from many nations who believe that the promise that God made to Abraham 4,000 years ago will be fulfilled. I want to tell you about two groups who made life-altering changes to act on that belief. Welcome to Israel Unveiled. My name is Sandy Wezowicz, and I'm the Israel Education Director for Aglow International, a ministry with established groups in more than 150 nations of the world. Through the centuries, there have been Christians from many nations who believe that the promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis 12 and again in Genesis 15 regarding the land and the people 4,000 years ago will be fulfilled. I want to tell you about two groups in the late 19th century who made life-altering changes to act on that belief. They came from America, each leaving their mark on the land of Zion. The first was a small group that came from the northeastern shore of the United States. On August 11th, 1866, a group of hardworking, industrious Gentile believers left a remote fishing village in Jonesport, Maine, heading to Jaffa, 5,000 miles away. They set sail for the 42-day journey on a boat that was newly built, the Nellie Chapin. They were members of a sect called Christian Lovers of Zion. Their mission was to develop the land and all of its resources for what they believed would be the return of the Jewish people back to their homeland. Their leader was a man named Reverend George Adams. He'd come along the coast of Maine. Actually, he had traveled on the eastern coast of the United States and came all the way up to Maine, preaching about preparing the land of Israel for the coming of the Messiah, believing that the seed of Judah will come back to the promised land, and the former and the latter rains are coming to make the land bloom like a rose and will be fulfilled and fruitful. It was a time in America when effects of the spiritual awakening in the Second Great Awakening in the late 18th century and the early 19th century that had swept across the country was still being felt. They went with the vision to help prepare the land for the ultimate return of the Jewish people. It's an interesting story of what they did. They were committed. They disassembled their Jonesport homes piece by piece. They were planning to rebuild them on parcels of land that they would purchase in Jaffa from the Ottoman Turks who still ruled Palestine. Remember, the 400-year rule of the Ottoman Empire wouldn't end until 1917, the end of World War I. So not only did they disassemble their homes and brought all of the lumber and everything that would entail rebuilding that home, they also carried their furniture, their farm tools, and their clothes. I mean, they were genuinely committed to fulfilling this vision that they had. They numbered 157. The oldest was 66 years old, and the youngest was only 4 months old. There were 35 young families. 48 of the 157 folks who left were under 12 years of age. This was almost 2 decades, by the way, before the arrival of the first group of Jews coming from Russia and Eastern Europe. Upon arriving in the land, and remember that that land was called Palestine, the pilgrims faced tremendous challenges. And their first challenge was that Reverend Adams learned that the purchase of the settlement from the Sultan of Turkey had been rejected. And there was a second challenge that followed right away. The harbor around Jaffa, where the ship would be anchored, was too shallow for the Nelly Chapin. So they had to actually drop anchor 2 miles offshore. So that meant that they had to bring everything that they owned and float it on rafts to the shore of Jaffa. It took days of hard work. What a terrible beginning. While they waited for the land purchase to finally be made legal, they ended up having to camp out for 6 weeks on the shore, on the beach. At the end of the period of time, they were cleared to begin building their homes and that they could start to plant crops. After the first 6 weeks, they finally did move up to higher ground, thank goodness, and things began to improve slightly. Now they had some fresh water from wells that they could use to not only drink and wash, but that they could use to plant the orange groves that they were planting so they could water them. But sadly, during that 6 weeks that they were on the beach, they drank water that was contaminated. That water had come from seepage from a nearby cemetery. And so by the end of that first 6 months, many became sick with cholera. And by the end of the year, sadly, 22 of those pilgrims died. The rains the first year, and actually for the next 5 years that would follow, were insufficient to produce an adequate harvest for the people. And to make matters worse, because they were from the northeast of the United States, they weren't used to the sweltering heat of the Middle East. Maine is, in the winter times, can be really cold. And they just weren't prepared for this climate. 44 more would return back to Maine. They were discouraged by everything that they had experienced. There had been a second group that were supposed to join the first group after the first year, but they canceled when they realized hearing the hard times that the people faced. But in the end, 30 people from representing 9 families stayed on. And thankfully, they eventually prospered. But they didn't prosper in farming. Some family members found employment by helping to build the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem. That was the first road that was built since Roman times. Some of the people made little hotels. And so they would provide a place to stay for the Jews who were coming to visit the Promised Land, or Palestine, as it was called then. One of the group, Rola Floyd, became the first recognized tour guide in the land of Israel. Beginning in 1869, he used his horse-drawn carriages for tours. And it was written of him that he was a man of great integrity. He became recognized as the father of group biblical tourism in Israel. By the 1980s, only a few of their homes were still standing. They were ready really for demolition. But in 1990, there was a project to restore one of them. And another one of the homes was rescued 10 years later. In 2001, Dr. Reed and Jean Holmes purchased it and refurbished it as the Maine Fellowship House Museum in Jaffa. And they did this to honor the Christian Gentile community, that first community in Jaffa. And today you can visit it. If you go to Israel, it's on Auerbach Street 10. And you can visit there and see that wonderful little museum. And it stands as a tribute to the determination of Christians 5,000 miles away, 160 years ago, who came to fulfill a dream, to help prepare the land for the rebirth of the Jewish state. A great story of perseverance, and they've left their mark on the land. I was actually introduced to the second story that I want to share about Christians who came to leave their mark on Israel. It was on one of my trips to Israel. My friend Nancy and I were invited to our Arab friend to join him for coffee, he and his dad, for coffee, Turkish coffee, and dessert at the American colony. It's really a quiet, beautiful sanctuary, and it's on the edge between East and West Jerusalem, where international journalists, UN officials, celebrities, and politicians have enjoyed a kind of old world elegance and a beautiful garden courtyard for the last 140 years. It's an interesting story, and I want to share it with you today. By the 1860s, Horatio Spafford was a wealthy Chicago lawyer with a thriving practice. He had a beautiful home. He had a wife and 4 daughters and a son. He was a devout Christian, and it was said of him that he was a devout student of scriptures. His circle of friends included Dwight L. Moody and Ira Sankey and various other well-known Christians of the day. At the very height of his financial and professional success, Horatio and his wife, Anna, suffered the tragic loss of their young son. And shortly thereafter, on October 8th, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed almost every real estate investment that Spafford had. In 1873, he scheduled a boat trip to Europe in order to give his wife and his 4 daughters a much-needed vacation and a time that would be a special time to recover from so much tragedy that they had faced. And he put his wife and those 4 daughters on that ship and was going to join them a little bit later because he still had a little bit of business sort of to tie up those, non-expected last-minute details that often happen when we make plans. And it was on that Atlantic voyage in the middle of the night that the ship plowed into the Villa de Havre, and 273 passengers drowned. Several days later, Horatio received a notice of the devastating news in a telegram from Anna, and it simply said, "Saved, but saved alone. What shall I do?" All 4 of his daughters drowned. Only his wife had survived. Grieving, Spafford boarded a boat that would take him to his beloved Anna in England. As they crossed the ocean, where the wreck occurred, the captain stopped the ship and he informed Horatio it was there that the horrific accident took place. And so he stopped the ship to give Horatio a moment of quiet. It was on that trip that he penned the now famous words, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." The years following that great tragedy, Anna did give birth to 3 more children. On February 11th, 1880, their only son, Horatio Spafford, died at 4 years old of scarlet fever. The church that they had belonged to and were faithful members regarded this tragedy as some kind of divine punishment against the Spaffords. And the question was posed amongst the members, what had the Spaffords done to be so rebellious that they brought such tragedy upon themselves? In response, the Spaffords left and they formed their own Messianic sect, dubbed by those in the American press as the Overcomers. In August 1881, the Spaffords left America and set out with 13 other adults and 3 children for Jerusalem. They committed to live as the early Christians did, a very simple life with everything held in common, in a house in the old city of Jerusalem. Their doors of hospitality was open to everyone, to their Arab and Jewish neighbors, as well as the Bedouins who lived in the surrounding areas. They established wonderful relationships with the locals because of their acts of kindness and the help that they offered to everyone in need. Soon, 70 Swedish believers joined them in 1894. And so this now enlarged an American Swedish commune. And 2 years later, another 55 Swedish believers joined them. And this now required a larger place to live. So in the eastern part of Jerusalem, they purchased a mansion that was built in the 19th century. It was owned by a pasha. A pasha is a high-ranking officer in the Ottoman Turk military. And he had built this mansion for his 4 wives and for himself. And that palace would soon become the American Colony Hotel. The colony has always been known locally as a neutral place located right in between East and West Jerusalem, welcoming to all. And it actually has stayed outside of all the politics in that land where divisions and passions can be pretty stormy. It maintains a wonderful relationship with all the peoples of the city. Neither Arabs nor Jews own it. It is really an oasis for both groups. In 1980, the daily management of the hotel was handed over to Gower Hotels of Switzerland, but family members, now these were descendants of the original founding colony, still owned it. The chairman of the board of directors, Paul Vester, is a direct descendant of one of the colony's original founders. I actually visited the American colony a second time. Once was for that wonderful coffee and dessert with my Arab friends. And the second time, I was part of a delegation of the American Israel Education Foundation. And during that trip, we met at the American colony with the Palestinian chief negotiator to hear their perspective on the Middle East. And so on the way to the conference room where we were meeting with that gentleman, we were able to walk the halls and view many of the photographs that were lining the halls, marking the wonderful history of the American colony. So if you have an opportunity to visit Israel, include in your itinerary a stop at the Maine Fellowship House Museum in Jaffa and the American colony in Jerusalem. Both are just little gems in a land that's rich in history. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of history of the 19th century of the Christian influence in Israel. And if you did enjoy it, please, I hope that you will click like and share. And to see more of podcasts like this, if you would simply click subscribe. Thank you so much. Be blessed and shalom.